Section 3 of the Arabian Nights Entertainments, Volume 3, translated by Jonathan Scott. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Gillian Henry. The Arabian Nights Entertainments, Volume 3, translated by Jonathan Scott, 1754 to 1829. Section 3. The Story of Bedr, Prince of Persia, and Jehaunara, Princess of Samandal or Samandar. Part 3. The Sea King was not long in arriving at his palace with the King of Persia, whom he immediately carried to the Queen's apartments and presented to her. The King of Persia kissed the Queen his grandmother's hands, and she embraced him with great demonstrations of joy. "I do not ask you how you do," said she. "I see you are very well, and am rejoiced at it. But I desire to know how my daughter your mother, Queen Gulnare, does." The King of Persia took great care not to let her know that he had come away without taking leave of her. On the contrary, he told her the Queen his mother was in perfect health, and had enjoined him to pay her duty to her. The Queen then presented him to the princesses, and while he was in conversation with them, she left him, and went with King Saleh into a closet, who told her how the King of Persia was fallen in love with the Princess Jehaunara, upon the bare relation of her beauty, and contrary to his intention; that he had, against his own wishes, brought him along with him, and that he was going to concert measures to procure the princess for him in marriage. Although King Saleh was, to do him justice, perfectly innocent of the King of Persia's passion, yet the Queen could hardly forgive his indiscretion in mentioning the Princess Jehaunara before him. "Your imprudence is not to be forgiven," said she. "Can you think that the King of Samandal, whose character is so well known, will have greater consideration for you than the many other kings to whom he has refused his daughter with such evident contempt? Would you have him send you away with the same confusion?" "Madam," replied King Saleh, "I have already told you it was contrary to my intention that the king my nephew heard what I related of the beauty of the princess to the queen my sister. The fault is committed, and we must consider what a violent passion he has for this princess, and that he will die with grief and affliction if we do not speedily obtain her for him. For my part, I shall omit nothing that can contribute to effect their union. Since I was, though innocently, the cause of the malady, I will do all I can to remedy it. I hope, madam, you will approve of my resolution to go myself and wait on the King of Samandal with a rich present of precious stones, and demand the princess his daughter of him for the King of Persia. I have some reason to believe he will not refuse, but will be pleased with an alliance with one of the greatest potentates of the earth." "It were to have been wished," replied the Queen, "that we had not been under a necessity of making this demand, since the success of our attempt is not so certain as we could desire. But since my grandson's peace and content depend upon it, I freely give my consent. But above all, I charge you, since you well know the humour of the King of Samandal, that you take care to speak to him with due respect, and in a manner that cannot possibly offend him." The Queen prepared the present herself, composing it of diamonds, rubies, emeralds, and strings of pearl, all which she put into a rich box. Next morning King Saleh took leave of her majesty and the King of Persia, and departed with a chosen and small troop of officers and attendants. He soon arrived at the kingdom and the palace of the King of Samandal, who delayed not to give him audience. He rose from his throne as soon as he perceived him, and King Saleh, forgetting his character for some moments, knowing whom he had to deal with, prostrated himself at his feet, wishing him the accomplishment of all his desires. The King of Samandal stooped to raise him, and after he had placed him on his left hand, told him he was welcome, and asked him if there was anything he could do to serve him. "Sir," answered King Saleh, though I should have no other motive than that of paying my respects to the most potent, most prudent, and most valiant prince in the world, feeble would be my language to express how much I honour your majesty. Could you penetrate into my inmost soul, you would be convinced of the great veneration I have for you, and of my ardent desire to testify my attachment." Having spoken these words, he took the box of jewels from one of his servants, and having opened it, presented it to the king, imploring him to accept of it for his sake. "Prince," replied the king of Samandal, "you would not make me such a present unless you had a request proportionable to it to propose. If there be anything in my power to grant, you may freely command me, and I shall feel the greatest pleasure in complying with your wishes. Speak, and tell me frankly, wherein I can serve you." "I must own ingenuously," replied King Saleh, "I have a boon to ask of your majesty, and I shall take care to ask nothing but what is in your power to bestow. The thing depends so absolutely on yourself, that it would be to no purpose to ask it of any one else. I ask it then with all possible earnestness, and I beg of you not to refuse me." "If it be so," replied the king of Samandal, "you have nothing to do but acquaint me what it is, and you shall see after what manner I can oblige when it is in my power." "Sir," said King Saleh, "after the confidence with which your majesty has been pleased to inspire me, I will not dissemble any longer, that I came to beg of you to honour our house with your alliance by the marriage of your daughter, and to strengthen the good understanding that has so long subsisted between our two crowns." At these words the king of Samandal burst into a loud laugh, falling back in his throne against a cushion that supported him, and with an imperious and scornful air said, "King Saleh, I have always hitherto thought you a prince of great wisdom and prudence, but what you say convinces me I was mistaken. Tell me, I beseech you, where was your wit or discretion when you formed to yourself such a chimera as you have proposed to me? Could you conceive a thought of aspiring in marriage to a princess, the daughter of so powerful a monarch as myself? You ought to have considered the great distance between us, and not run the risk of losing in a moment the esteem I always had for you." King Saleh was hurt at this affronting answer, and could scarcely restrain his resentment. However, he replied with all possible moderation, "God reward your majesty as you deserve. I have the honour to inform you, I do not demand the princess your daughter in marriage for myself. Had I done even that, your majesty and the princess, so far from being offended, should have thought it an honour done to both. Your majesty well knows I am one of the kings of the sea as well as yourself, that my ancestors yield not in antiquity to any royal house, and that the kingdom I inherit is no less potent and flourishing than your own. If your majesty had not interrupted me, you had soon understood that the favour I asked was not for myself, but for the young king of Persia, my nephew, whose power and grandeur, no less than his personal good qualities, cannot be unknown to you. Everybody acknowledges the Princess Jehaun to be the most beautiful under ocean, but it is no less true that the king of Persia is the handsomest and most accomplished prince on earth. Thus the favour that is asked being likely to redound to the honour both of your majesty and the princess your daughter, you ought not to doubt that your consent to an alliance so equal will be unanimously approved in all the kingdoms of the sea. The princess is worthy of the king of Persia, and the king of Persia is no less worthy of her." The king of Samandal had not permitted King Saleh to speak so long, but that rage deprived him of all power of speech. At length, however, he broke out into outrageous and insulting expressions, unworthy of a great king. "Dog!" cried he, "dare you talk to me after this manner, and so much as mention my daughter's name in my presence?
Can you think the son of your sister Gulnar worthy to come in competition with my daughter? Who are you? Who was your father? Who is your sister? And who your nephew? Was not his father a dog, and the son of a dog, like you? Guards, seize the insolent wretch, and strike off his head." The few officers who were about the king of Samandal were immediately going to obey his orders, when King Saleh, who was in the flower of his age, nimble and vigorous, got from them before they could draw their sabres, and having reached the palace gate, found there 1,000 men of his relations and friends, well armed and equipped, who were just arrived. The queen his mother, having considered the small number of attendants he had taken with him, and foreseeing the reception he would probably meet from the king of Samandal, had sent these troops to protect and defend him in case of danger, ordering them to make haste. Those of his relations who were at the head of this troop had reason to rejoice at their seasonal arrival, when they beheld him and his attendants running in great disorder, and pursued. "Sire," cried his friends, the moment he joined them, "who has insulted you? We are ready to revenge you. You need only command us." King Saleh related his case to them in few words, and putting himself at the head of a troop, while some seized the gates, he re-entered the palace. The few officers and guards who had pursued him being soon dispersed, he forced the king of Samandal's apartment, who, being abandoned by his attendants, was soon seized. King Saleh left sufficient guards to secure his person, and then went from apartment to apartment to search after the Princess Jehaunara; but she, on the first alarm, had, together with her women, sprung up to the surface of the sea, and escaped to a desert island. While this passed in the palace of the king of Samandal, those of King Saleh's attendants who had fled at the first menaces of that king, put the queen mother into terrible consternation on relating the danger of her son. King Beder, who was present at the time, was the more concerned, as he looked upon himself as the principal author of the mischief that might ensue. Therefore, not caring to abide the queen's presence any longer, whilst she was giving the orders necessary at that conjuncture, he darted up from the bottom of the sea, and not knowing how to find his way to the kingdom of Persia, happened to land on the island where the Princess Jehaunara had saved herself. The prince, not a little disturbed in mind, seated himself under the shade of a large tree, surrounded by others. Whilst he was endeavouring to recover himself, he heard somebody talking, but was too far off to understand what was said. He arose and advanced softly towards the place whence the sound proceeded, where among the branches he perceived a beauty that dazzled him. "Doubtless," said he within himself, stopping and considering her with great attention, "this must be the Princess Jehaunara, whom fear has obliged to abandon her father's palace; or if it be not, she no less deserves my love." This said, he came forward, and discovering himself, approached the princess with profound reverence. "Madam," said he, "I can never sufficiently thank heaven for the favour it has done me in presenting to my eyes so much beauty. A greater happiness could not have befallen me than this opportunity to offer you my services. I beseech you therefore, madam, to accept them, it being impossible that a lady in this solitude should not want assistance." "True, my lord," replied Jehaunara sorrowfully, "it is not a little extraordinary for a lady of my quality to be in this situation. I am a princess, daughter of the king of Samandal, and my name is Jehaunara. I was at ease in my father's palace, in my apartment, when suddenly I heard a dreadful noise. News was immediately brought me that King Saleh, I know not for what reason, had forced the palace, seized the king my father, and murdered all the guards who made any resistance. I had only time to save myself, and escape hither from his violence." At these words, King Beder began to be concerned that he had quitted his grandmother so hastily, without staying to hear from her an explanation of the news that had been brought.
but he was on the other hand overjoyed to find that the king his uncle had rendered himself master of the king of Samandal's person, not doubting but he would consent to give up the princess for his liberty. "Adorable princess," continued he, "your concern is most just, but it is easy to put an end both to that and your father's captivity. You will agree with me when I shall tell you that I am Beder, king of Persia, and King Saleh is my uncle. I assure you, madam, he has no design to seize the king your father's dominions. His only intention is to obtain your father's consent, that I may have the honour and happiness of being his son-in-law. I had already given my heart to you, upon the bare relation of your beauty and charms, and now, far from repenting, I beg of you to accept it, and to be assured that I will love you as long as I live. I dare flatter myself you will not refuse this favour, but be ready to acknowledge that a king who quitted his dominions purely on your account deserves some acknowledgment. Permit me then, beauteous princess, to have the honour to present you to the king my uncle, and the king your father shall no sooner have consented to our marriage than King Saleh will leave him sovereign of his dominions as before." This declaration of King Beder did not produce the effect he expected. It is true, the princess no sooner saw him, than his person, air, and the grace wherewith he accosted her, led her to regard him as one who would not have been disagreeable to her. But when she heard that he had been the occasion of all the ill treatment her father had suffered, of the grief and fright she had endured, and especially the necessity she was reduced to of flying her country, she looked upon him as an enemy with whom she ought to have no connection. Whatever inclination she might have to agree to the marriage which he desired, she determined never to consent, reflecting that one of the reasons her father might have against this match might be that King Beder was the son of a king of the earth. She would not, however, let King Beder know her resentment, but sought an occasion to deliver herself dexterously out of his hands, and seeming in the meantime to have a great kindness for him, "Are you then," said she, with all possible civility, "son of Queen Gulnare, so famous for her wit and beauty? I am glad of it, and rejoice that you are the son of so worthy a mother. The king my father was much in the wrong so strongly to oppose our union. Had he but seen you, he must have consented to make us happy." Saying so, she reached forth her hand to him as a token of friendship. King Beder, believing himself arrived at the very pinnacle of happiness, held forth his hand, and taking that of the princess, stooped down to kiss it, when she, pushing him back, and spitting in his face, for want of water to throw at him, said, "Wretch, quit the form of a man, and take that of a white bird with a red bill and feet." Upon her pronouncing these words, King Beder was immediately changed into a bird of that description, to his great surprise and mortification. "Take him," said she to one of her women, "and carry him to the dry island." This island was only one frightful rock, where not a drop of water was to be had. The waiting woman took the bird, but in executing her princess's orders, had compassion on King Beder's misfortune. "It would be great pity," said she to herself, "to let a prince so worthy to live die of hunger and thirst. The princess, who is good and gentle, will, it may be, repent of this cruel order when she comes to herself. It were better that I carried him to a place where he may die a natural death." She accordingly carried him to a well frequented island, and left him in a charming plain, planted with all sorts of fruit trees, and watered by divers rivulets. Let us return to King Saleh. After he had sought for the Princess Jehaun ara to no purpose, he caused the king of Samandal to be shut up in his own palace, under a strong guard, and having given the necessary orders for governing the kingdom in his absence, returned to give the queen his mother an account of what he had done. The first question he asked on his arrival was, where was the king his nephew, and he learned with great surprise and vexation that he could not be found. "News being brought me," said the queen, "of the danger you were in at the palace of the king of Samandal, while I was giving orders to send you other troops to avenge you, he disappeared. He must have been alarmed at hearing of your being in such great danger, and did not think himself in sufficient security with us." This news exceedingly afflicted King Saleh, who now repented being so easily wrought upon by King Beder as to carry him away with him without his mother's consent. He sent everywhere to seek for him, but could hear no tidings of him, and instead of the joy he felt at having carried on so far the marriage, which he looked upon as his own work, his grief for this accident was more mortifying. While he was under this suspense about his nephew, he left his kingdom under the administration of his mother, and went to govern that of the king of Samandal, whom he continued to keep with great vigilance, though with all due respect to his character. The same day that King Saleh returned to the kingdom of Samandal, Queen Gulnare arrived at the court of the queen her mother. The princess was not at all surprised to find her son did not return the same day he set out, it being not uncommon for him to go farther than he proposed in the heat of the chase. But when she saw he neither returned the next day nor the day after, she began to be alarmed, as may easily be imagined from her affection for him. This alarm was augmented when the officers who had accompanied the king, and were obliged to return after they had for a long time sought in vain both for him and his uncle, came and told her majesty they must of necessity have come to some harm, or must be together in some place which they could not guess, since notwithstanding all the diligence they had used, they could hear no tidings of them. Their horses indeed they had found, but as for their persons, they knew not where to look for them. The queen hearing this, had resolved to dissemble and conceal her affliction, bidding the officers to search once more with their utmost diligence, but in the meantime she plunged into the sea, to satisfy herself as to the suspicion she had entertained that King Saleh must have carried his nephew with him. This great queen would have been more affectionately received by her mother, had she not on first seeing her guessed the occasion of her coming. "Daughter," said she, "I plainly perceive you are not come hither to visit me. You come to inquire after the king your son, and the only news I can tell you will augment both your grief and mine. I no sooner saw him arrive in our territories than I rejoiced, yet when I came to understand he had come away without your knowledge, I began to participate with you the concern you must needs suffer." Then she related to her with what zeal King Saleh went to demand the Princess Jehaun in marriage for King Beder, and what had happened till her son disappeared. "I have sought diligently after him," added she, "and the king my son, who is but just gone to govern the kingdom of Samandal, has done all that lay in his power. All our endeavours have hitherto proved unsuccessful, but we must hope nevertheless to see him again, perhaps when we least expect it." Queen Gulnare was not satisfied with this hope. She looked upon the king her son as lost, and lamented him bitterly, laying all the blame on the king his uncle. The queen her mother made her consider the necessity of not yielding too much to grief. "The king your brother," said she, "ought not, it is true, to have talked to you so inconsiderately about that marriage, nor ever have consented to carry away the king my grandson, without acquainting you. Yet, since it is not certain that the king of Persia is absolutely lost, you ought to neglect nothing to preserve his kingdom for him. Lose then no more time, but return to your capital. Your presence there will be necessary, and it will not be difficult for you to preserve the public peace, by causing it to be published that the king of Persia was gone to visit his grandmother." This was sufficient to oblige Queen Gulnare to yield. She took leave of the queen her mother, and returned to the palace of the capital of Persia, before she had been missed. She immediately dispatched persons to recall the officers she had sent after the king, to tell them that she knew where his majesty was, and that they should soon see him again. She also caused the same report to be spread throughout the city, and governed, in concert with the prime minister and council, with the same tranquillity as if the king had been present. To return to King Beder, whom the Princess Jehaunara's waiting woman had left in the island before mentioned, that monarch was not a little surprised when he found himself alone and under the form of a bird. He esteemed himself yet more unhappy, in that he knew not where he was, or in what part of the world the kingdom of Persia lay. But if he had known, and had tried the force of his wings to hazard the traversing so many extensive watery regions, and had reached it, what could he have gained but the mortification to continue still in the same form, and not to be accounted even a man, much less acknowledged king of Persia? He was forced to remain where he was, live upon such food as birds of his kind were wont to have, and to pass the night on a tree. A few days afterwards, a peasant, skilled in taking birds with nets, chanced to come to the place where he was, when perceiving so fine a bird, the like of which he had never seen, though he had followed that employment for a long while, he began greatly to rejoice. He employed all his art to ensnare him, and at length succeeded, and took him. Overjoyed at so great a prize, which he looked upon to be of more worth than all the other birds he commonly took, he shut it up in a cage, and carried it to the city. As soon as he was come into the market, a citizen stopped him and asked him how much he would have for his bird. Instead of answering, the peasant demanded of the citizen what he would do with him in case he should buy him. "What wouldst thou have me to do with him?" answered the citizen, "but roast and eat him." "If that be the case," replied the peasant, "I suppose you would think me very well paid if you should give me the smallest piece of silver for him. I set a much higher value upon him, and you should not have him for a piece of gold. Although I am advanced in years, I never saw such a bird in my life. I intend to make a present of him to the king. He will know its value better than you." Without staying any longer in the market, the peasant went directly to the palace, and placed himself exactly before the king's apartment. His majesty being at a window where he could see all that passed in the court, no sooner cast his eyes on this beautiful bird than he sent an officer of his eunuchs to buy it for him. The officer, going to the peasant, demanded of him how much he would have for the bird. "If it be for his majesty," answered the peasant, "I humbly beg of him to accept it of me as a present, and I desire you to carry it to him." The officer took the bird to the king, who found it so great a rarity, that he ordered the same officer to take 10 pieces of gold and carry them to the peasant, who departed very well satisfied. The king ordered the bird to be put into a magnificent cage, and gave it corn and water in rich vessels. The king being then ready to mount on horseback to go hunting, had not time to consider the bird, therefore had it brought to him as soon as he returned. The officer brought the cage, and the king, that he might the better view the bird, took it out himself, and perched it upon his hand. Looking earnestly upon it, he demanded of the officer if he had seen it eat. "Sir," replied the officer, "your majesty may observe the vessel with his food is still full, and I have not observed that he has touched any of it." Then the king ordered him meat of divers sorts, that he might take what he liked best. The table being spread, and dinner served up just as the king had given these orders, as soon as the dishes were placed, the bird, clapping his wings, leaped off the king's hand, flew upon the table, where he began to peck the bread and victuals, sometimes on one plate and sometimes on another. The king was so surprised that he immediately sent the officer of the eunuchs to desire the queen to come and see this wonder. The officer related it to her majesty, and she came forthwith; but she no sooner saw the bird than she covered her face with her veil, and would have retired. The king, surprised at her proceeding, as there was none present in the chamber but the eunuchs and the women who attended her, asked the reason of her conduct. "Sir," answered the queen, "your majesty will no longer be surprised when you understand that this is not, as you suppose, a bird, but a man." "Madam," said the king, more astonished than before, "you mean to banter me, but you shall never persuade me that a bird can be a man." "Sir," replied the queen, "far be it from me to banter your majesty. Nothing is more certain than what I have had the honour to tell you. I can assure your majesty it is the king of Persia, named Beder, son of the celebrated Gulnare, princess of one of the largest kingdoms of the sea, nephew of Saleh, king of that kingdom, and grandson of Queen Farasht, mother of Gulnare and Saleh. And it was the princess Jehaunara, daughter of the king of Samandal, who thus metamorphosed him into a bird." That the king might no longer doubt of what she affirmed, she told him the whole story, and stated that the princess Jehaunara had thus revenged herself for the ill treatment which King Saleh had used towards the king of Samandal, her father. The king had the less difficulty to believe this assertion of the queen, as he knew her to be a skilful magician; and as she knew everything which passed in every part of the world, he was always by her means timely informed of the designs of the kings his neighbours against him, and prevented them. His majesty had compassion on the king of Persia, and earnestly besought his queen to break the enchantment, that he might return to his own form. The queen consented with great willingness. "Sir," said she to the king, "be pleased to take the bird into your closet, and I will show you a king worthy of the consideration you have for him." The bird, which had ceased eating and attended to what the king and queen said, would not give his majesty the trouble to take him, but hopped into the closet before him; and the queen came in soon after, with a vessel full of water in her hand. She pronounced over the vessel some words unknown to the king, till the water began to boil, when she took some of it in her hand, and sprinkling a little upon the bird, said, "By virtue of these holy and mysterious words I have just pronounced, and in the name of the Creator of heaven and earth, who raises the dead and supports the universe, quit the form of a bird, and reassume that received from thy Creator." The words were scarcely out of the queen's mouth, when, instead of a bird, the king saw a young prince of good shape, air, and mien. King Beder immediately fell on his knees, and thanked God for the favour that had been bestowed upon him. He then took the king's hand, who helped him up, and kissed it in token of gratitude; but the king embraced him with great joy, and testified to him the satisfaction he had to see him. He would then have made his acknowledgments to the queen, but she was already retired to her apartment. The king made him sit at the table with him, and prayed him to relate how the princess Jehaunara could have the inhumanity to transform into a bird so amiable a prince; and the king of Persia immediately satisfied him. When he had ended, the king, provoked at the proceeding of the princess, could not help blaming her. "It was commendable," said he, "in the princess of Samandal not to be insensible of the king her father's ill treatment, but to carry her vengeance so far, and especially against a prince who was not culpable, was what she could never be able to justify herself for. But let us have done with this subject, and tell me, I beseech you, in what I can farther serve you." "Sir," answered King Beder, "my obligation to your majesty is so great, that I ought to remain with you all my life to testify my gratitude; but since your majesty sets no limits to your generosity, I entreat you to grant me one of your ships to transport me to Persia, where I fear my absence, which has been but too long, may have occasioned some disorder, and that the queen my mother, from whom I concealed my departure, may be distracted under the certainty whether I am alive or dead." The king readily granted what he desired, and immediately gave orders for equipping one of his largest ships, and the best sailors in his numerous fleet. The ship was soon furnished with all its complement of men, provisions, and ammunition; and as soon as the wind became fair, King Beder embarked, after having taken leave of the king and thanked him for all his favours. The ship sailed before the wind for 10 days together, but on the 11th the wind changed, and there followed a furious tempest. The ship was not only driven out of its course, but so violently tossed that all its masts were brought by the board, and driving along at the pleasure of the wind, it at length struck against a rock and bulged. The greatest part of the people were instantly drowned. Some few were saved by swimming, and others by getting on pieces of the wreck. King Beder was among the latter, when, after having been tossed about for some time by the waves and torrents, under great uncertainty of his fate, he at length perceived himself near the shore, and not far from a city that seemed of great extent. He exerted his remaining strength to reach the land, and was at length so fortunate as to be able to touch the ground with his feet. He immediately abandoned his piece of wood, which had been of such great service to him, but when he came pretty near the shore, was greatly surprised to see horses, camels, mules, asses, oxen, cows, bulls, and other animals crowding to the shore, and putting themselves in a posture to oppose his landing. He had the utmost difficulty to conquer their obstinacy and force his way, but at length he succeeded, and sheltered himself among the rocks till he had recovered his breath, and dried his clothes in the sun. When the prince advanced to enter the city, he met with the same opposition from these animals, who seemed to intend to make him forego his design, and give him to understand it was dangerous to proceed. King Beder, however, entered the city, and saw many fair and spacious streets, but was surprised to find no human beings. This made him think it was not without cause that so many animals had opposed his passage. Going forward, nevertheless, he observed divers shops open, which gave him reason to believe the place was not so destitute of inhabitants as he imagined. He approached one of these shops, where several sorts of fruits were exposed for sale, and saluted very courteously an old man who was sitting within. The old man, who was busy about something, lifted up his head, and seeing a youth who had an appearance of grandeur in his air, started, asked him whence he came, and what business had brought him there. King Beder satisfied him in a few words, and the old man farther asked him if he had met anybody on the road. "You are the first person I have seen," answered the king, "and I cannot comprehend how so fine and large a city comes to be without inhabitants." "Come in, sir, stay no longer upon the threshold," replied the old man, "or peradventure some misfortune may happen to you. I will satisfy your curiosity at leisure, and give you a reason why it is necessary you should take this precaution." King Beder entered the shop, and sat down by the old man. The latter, who had received from him an account of his misfortunes, knew he must want nourishment, therefore immediately presented him what was necessary to recover his strength; and although King Beder was very earnest to know why he had taken the precaution to make him enter the shop, he would nevertheless not be prevailed upon to tell him anything till he had done eating, for fear the sad things he had to relate might spoil his appetite. When he found he ate no longer, he said to him, "You have great reason to thank God that you got hither without any accident." "Alas, why?" demanded King Beder, much surprised and alarmed. "Because," answered he, "this city is the city of enchantments, and is governed by a queen who is not only one of the finest of her sex, but likewise a notorious and dangerous sorceress. You will be convinced of this," added he, "when you know that these horses, mules, and other animals which you have seen, are so many men like ourselves, whom she has transformed by her diabolical art. And when young men like you enter the city, she has persons planted to stop and bring them, either by fair means or force, before her. She receives them in the most obliging manner, caresses them, regales them, lodges them magnificently, and gives them so many reasons to believe that she loves them, that she never fails of success. But she does not suffer them long to enjoy this happiness. There is not one of them but she has transformed into some animal or bird at the end of 40 days. You told me all these animals presented themselves to oppose your landing, and hinder you entering the city. This was the only way in which they could make you comprehend the danger you were going to expose yourself to, and they did all in their power to prevent you." This account exceedingly afflicted the young king of Persia. "Alas!" cried he, "to what extremities has my ill fortune reduced me! I am hardly freed from one enchantment, which I look back upon with horror, but I find myself exposed to another much more terrible." This gave him occasion to relate his story to the old man more at length, and to acquaint him of his birth, quality, his passion for the princess of Samandal, and her cruelty in changing him into a bird the very moment he had seen her and declared his love to her. When the prince came to speak of his good fortune in finding a queen who broke the enchantment, the old man, to encourage him, said, "Notwithstanding all I have told you of the magic queen is true, that ought not to give you the least disquiet, since I am generally beloved throughout the city, and am not unknown to the queen herself, who has much respect for me. Therefore it was your peculiar good fortune which led you to address yourself to me rather than to any one else. You are secure in my house, where I advise you to continue if you think fit, and provided you do not stray from hence, I dare assure you, you will have no just cause to complain of my insincerity." King Beder thanked the old man for his kind reception, and the protection he was pleased so readily to afford him. He sat down at the entrance of the shop, where he no sooner appeared, but his youth and good person attracted the eyes of all who passed that way. Many stopped and complimented the old man on his having acquired so fine a slave, as they imagined the king to be, and they were the more surprised as they could not comprehend how so beautiful a youth could escape the queen's knowledge. "Believe not," said the old man, "this is a slave. You all know that I am not rich enough, nor of rank, to have one of this consequence. He is my nephew, son of a brother of mine who is dead, and as I had no children of my own, I sent for him to keep me company." They congratulated his good fortune in having so fine a young man for his relation, but could not help telling him they feared the queen would take him from him. "You know her well," said they to him, "and you cannot be ignorant of the danger to which you are exposed, after all the examples you have seen. How grieved would you be if she should serve him as she has done so many others whom we knew." "I am obliged to you," replied the old man, "for your good will toward me, and I heartily thank you for the care you seem to take of my interest; but I shall never entertain the least thought that the queen will do me any injury, after all the kindness she has professed for me. In case she happens to hear of this young man, and speaks to me about him, I doubt not she will cease to think of him as soon as she comes to know he is my nephew." The old man was exceedingly glad to hear the commendations they bestowed on the young king of Persia. He was as much affected with them as if he had been his own son, and he conceived a kindness for him, which augmented every day during the stay he made with him. Section 4 of the Arabian Nights Entertainments, Volume 3, translated by Jonathan Scott. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Gillian Henry. The Arabian Nights Entertainments, Volume 3, translated by Jonathan Scott, 1754 to 1829. Section 4. The story of Beder, Prince of Persia, and Jahaunara, Princess of Samandal or Samandar. Part 4. They had lived about a month together, when, as King Beder was sitting at the shop door, after his ordinary manner, Queen Labe, so was this magic queen named, happened to come by with great pomp. The young king no sooner perceived the guards advancing before her than he arose, and going into the shop, asked the old man what all that show meant. "The queen is coming by," answered he, "but stand still and fear nothing." The queen's guards, clothed in purple uniform, and well armed and mounted, marched to the number of 1,000 in 4 files, with their sabres drawn, and every one of their officers, as they passed by the shop, saluted the old man. Then followed a like number of eunuchs, habited in brocaded silk, and better mounted, whose officers did the old man the like honour. Next came as many young ladies on foot, equally beautiful, richly dressed, and ornamented with precious stones. They marched gravely, with half pikes in their hands, and in the midst of them appeared Queen Labe, on a horse glittering with diamonds, with a golden saddle, and a housing of inestimable value. All the young ladies saluted the old man as they passed him, and the queen, struck with the good mien of King Beder, stopped as soon as she came before the shop. "Abdallah," so was the old man named, said she to him, "tell me, I beseech thee, does that beautiful and charming slave belong to thee, and hast thou long been in possession of him?" Abdallah, before he answered the queen, threw himself on the ground, and rising again, said, "Madam, he is my nephew, son of a brother who has not long been dead. Having no children, I look upon him as my son, and sent for him to come and comfort me, intending to leave him what I have when I die." Queen Labe, who had never yet seen any one to compare with King Beder, began to conceive a passion for him, and thought immediately of getting the old man to abandon him to her. "Father," said she, "will you not oblige me so far as to make me a present of this young man? Do not refuse me, I conjure you, and I swear by the fire and the light, I will make him so great and powerful, that no individual in the world ever arrived at such good fortune. I trust you will grant me what I desire, more on account of the friendship I am assured you have for me, than for the esteem you know I always had, and shall ever have, for you." "Madam," replied the good Abdallah, "I am infinitely obliged to your majesty for all the kindness you have for me, and the honours you propose to do my nephew. He is not worthy to approach so great a queen, and I humbly beseech your majesty to excuse him." "Abdallah," replied the queen, "I all along flattered myself you loved me, and I could never have thought you would have shown me so much disrespect as to slight my request. But I here swear once more by the fire and light, and even by whatsoever is most sacred in my religion, that I will pass on no farther till I have conquered your obstinacy. I understand well what raises your apprehensions, but I promise you shall never have any occasion to repent having obliged me in so sensible a manner." Old Abdallah was exceeding grieved, both on his own account and King Beder's, at being in a manner forced to obey the queen. "Madam," replied he, "I would not willingly have your majesty entertain an ill opinion of the respect I have for you, and my zeal always to contribute whatever I can to oblige you. I put entire confidence in your royal word, and I do not in the least doubt you will keep it. I only beg of your majesty to delay doing this great honour to my nephew till you shall again pass this way." "That shall be to morrow," said the queen, who inclined her head as a token of her being pleased, and so went forward towards her palace. When Queen Labe and all her attendants were out of sight, the good Abdallah said to King Beder, "Son," for so he was wont to call him, for fear of some time or other discovering him when he spoke of him in public, "it has not been in my power, as you may have observed, to refuse the queen what she demanded of me with so much earnestness, to the end I might not force her to employ her magic against both you and myself, openly or secretly, and treat you as much from resentment to you as to me, with more signal cruelty than all those she has had in her power, as I have already told you. But I have some reason to believe she will use you well, as she promised me, on account of that particular esteem she professes for me. This you may have seen by the respect shown me and the honours paid me by all her court. She would be a vile creature indeed if she should deceive me. but she shall not deceive me unpunished, for I know how to revenge myself." These assurances, which appeared very doubtful, were not sufficient to support King Bedr's spirits. "After all you have told me of this queen's wickedness," replied he, "you cannot wonder if I am somewhat fearful to approach her. I should, it may be, slight all you could tell me of her, and suffer myself to be dazzled by the lustre of grandeur that surrounds her, did I not know by experience what it is to be at the mercy of a sorceress. The condition I was in, through the enchantment of the Princess Jehaunara, and from which I was delivered only to fall almost immediately into the power of another, has made me look upon such a fate with horror." His tears hindered him from going on, and sufficiently showed with what repugnance he beheld himself under the fatal necessity of being delivered to Queen Labe. "Son," replied old Abdallah, "do not afflict yourself; for though I must own there is no great stress to be laid upon the promises and oaths of so perfidious a queen, yet I must withal acquaint you her power extends not to me. She knows this full well, and that is the reason, and no other, why she pays me so much respect. I can quickly hinder her from doing you the least harm, if she should be perfidious enough to attempt it. You may depend upon me, and provided you follow exactly the advice I shall give you, before I abandon you to her, she shall have no more power over you than she has over myself." The magic queen did not fail to pass by the old man's shop the next day, with the same pomp as the preceding, and Abdallah waited for her with great respect. "Father," cried she, "you may judge of my impatience to have your nephew with me, by my punctually coming to remind you of your promise. I know you are a man of your word, and I cannot think you will break it with me." Abdallah, who fell on his face as soon as he saw the queen approaching, rose up when she had done speaking, and as he would have no one hear what he had to say to her, he advanced with great respect as far as her horse's head, and then said softly, "Puissant queen, I am persuaded your majesty will not be offended at my seeming unwillingness to trust my nephew with you yesterday, since you cannot be ignorant of the reasons I had for it; but I conjure you to lay aside the secrets of that art which you possess in so wonderful a degree. I regard my nephew as my own son, and your majesty would reduce me to despair if you should deal with him as you have done with others." "I promise you I will not," replied the queen, "and I once more repeat the oath I made yesterday, that neither you nor your nephew shall have any cause to be offended at me. I see plainly," added she, "you are not yet well enough acquainted with me. You never saw me yet but through my veil; but as I find your nephew deserving of my friendship, I will show you I am not any ways unworthy of his." With that she threw off her veil, and discovered to King Beder, who came near her with Abdallah, an incomparable beauty. But King Beder was little charmed. "It is not enough," said he within himself, "to be beautiful. One's actions ought to correspond in regularity with one's features." Whilst King Beder was making these reflections, with his eyes fixed on Queen Labe, the old man turned towards him, and taking him by the arm, presented him to her. "Madam," said he, "I beg of your majesty once more to remember he is my nephew, and to let him come and see me sometimes." The queen promised he should, and to give a further mark of her gratitude, she caused a bag of 1,000 pieces of gold to be given him. He excused himself at first from receiving them, but she insisted absolutely upon it, and he could not refuse. She had caused a horse to be brought, as richly caparisoned as her own, for the king of Persia. Whilst he was mounting, "I forgot," said the queen to Abdallah, "to ask you your nephew's name. Pray, how is he called?" He answering his name was Beder, the full moon, her majesty replied, "Surely your ancestors were mistaken. They ought to have given you the name of Shems, the sun." When King Beder was mounted, he would have taken his station behind the queen, but she would not suffer him, and made him ride on her left hand. She looked at Abdallah, and after having made him an inclination with her head, departed. Instead of observing a satisfaction in the people's faces at the sight of their sovereign, King Beder took notice that they looked at her with contempt, and even cursed her. "The sorceress," said some, "has got a new subject to exercise her wickedness upon. Will heaven never deliver the world from her tyranny?" "Poor stranger," exclaimed others, "thou art much deceived if thou thinkest thy happiness will last long. It is only to render thy fall more terrible that thou art raised so high." These exclamations gave King Beder to understand Abdallah had told him nothing but the truth of Queen Labe; but as it now depended no longer on himself to escape the mischief, he committed himself to the will of heaven. The magic queen arrived at her palace, immediately alighted, and giving her hand to King Beder, entered with him, accompanied by her women and the officers of her eunuchs. She herself showed him all her apartments, where there was nothing to be seen but massive gold, precious stones, and furniture of wonderful magnificence. When she had carried him into her closet, she led him out into a balcony, from whence he observed a garden of surprising beauty. King Beder commended all he saw, but nevertheless so that he might not be discovered to be any other than old Abdallah's nephew. They discoursed on indifferent matters, till the queen was informed that dinner was served. The queen and King Beder arose, and went to place themselves at the table, which was of massive gold, and the dishes of the same metal. They began to eat, but drank hardly at all till the dessert came, when the queen caused a cup to be filled for her with excellent wine. She took it and drank to King Beder's health, then without putting it out of her hand, caused it to be filled again, and presented it to him. King Beder received it with profound respect, and by a very low bow signified to her majesty that he in return drank to her health. At the same time 10 of Queen Labe's women entered with musical instruments, with which and their voices they made an agreeable concert, while they continued drinking till late at night. At length both began so to be heated with wine that King Beder insensibly forgot he had to do with a magic queen, and looked upon her only as the most beautiful woman he had ever seen. As soon as the queen perceived she had wrought him to the pitch she desired, she made a sign to her eunuchs and women to retire. Next morning the queen and King Beder went to the bath. The women who had served the king there presented him with fine linen and a magnificent habit. The queen likewise, who was more splendidly dressed than the day before, came to receive him, and they went together to her apartments, where they had a repast brought them, and spent the remainder of the day in walking in the garden and in various other amusements. Queen Labe treated King Beder after this manner for 40 days, as she had been accustomed to do all her lovers. The 40th night, as they were in bed together, she, believing he was really asleep, arose without making any noise, but he was awake, and perceiving she had some design upon him, watched all her motions. Being up, she opened a chest, from whence she took a little box full of a yellow powder. Taking some of the powder, she laid a train of it across the chamber, and it immediately flowed in a rivulet of water, to the great astonishment of King Beder. He trembled with fear, but still pretended to sleep. Queen Labe next took up some of the water in a vessel, poured it into a basin that contained some flour, with which she made a paste, and kneaded it for a long time. Then she mixed with it certain drugs, which she took from different boxes, and made a cake, which she put into a covered baking pan. As she had taken care first of all to make a good fire, she took some of the coals and set the pan upon them, and while the cake was baking, she put up the vessels and boxes in their places again, and on her pronouncing certain words the rivulet disappeared. When the cake was baked, she took it off the coals, carried it into her closet, and afterwards returned to King Beder, who dissembled so well that she had not the least suspicion of his having seen what she had done. King Beder, whom the pleasures and amusements of a court had made to forget his good host Abdallah, began now to think of him again, and believed he had more than ordinary occasion for his advice, after all he had seen the queen do that night. As soon as he was up, therefore, he expressed a great desire to go and see his uncle, and begged of her majesty to permit him. "What, my dear Beder," cried the queen, "are you then already tired? I will not say with living in so superb a palace as mine is, where you must find so many pleasures, but with the company of a queen who loves you so passionately as I do, and has given you so many marks of affection." "Great queen," answered King Beder, "how can I be tired of so many favours and graces as your majesty perpetually heaps upon me? So far from it, I desire this permission, madam, purely to go and give my uncle an account of the mighty obligations I have to your majesty. I must own likewise, that my uncle loving me so tenderly, as I well know he does, having been absent from him now 40 days, I would not give him reason to think that I consent to remain longer without seeing him." "Go," said the queen, "you have my consent, but you will not be long before you return, if you consider I cannot possibly live without you." This said, she ordered him a horse richly caparisoned, and he departed. Old Abdallah was overjoyed to see King Beder. With regard to his quality, he embraced him tenderly, and King Beder returned his embrace, that nobody might doubt but that he was his nephew. As soon as they were sat down, "Well," said Abdallah to the king, "and how have you passed your time with that abominable sorceress?" "Hitherto," answered King Beder, "I must needs own she has been extraordinarily kind to me, and has done all she could to persuade me that she loves me faithfully. But I observed something last night, which gives me just reason to suspect that all her kindness was but dissimulation. Whilst she thought me asleep, although I was really awake, she stole from me with a great deal of precaution, which made me suspect her intention, and therefore I resolved to watch her, still feigning myself asleep." He then related to Abdallah in what manner he had seen her make the cake, and then added, "Hitherto," said he, "I must needs confess, I had almost forgotten not only you, but all the advice you gave me concerning the wickedness of this queen; but this last action of hers gives me reason to fear she intends to observe none of her promises or solemn oaths to you. I thought of you immediately, and I esteem myself happy that I have obtained permission to come to you." "You are not mistaken," replied old Abdallah with a smile, which shewed he did not himself believe she would have acted otherwise. "Nothing is capable of obliging a perfidious woman to amend. But fear nothing, I know how to make the mischief she intends you fall upon herself. You are alarmed in time, and you could not have done better than to have recourse to me. It is her ordinary practice to keep her lovers only 40 days, and after that time, instead of sending them home, to turn them into animals, to stock her forests and parks. But I thought of measures yesterday to prevent her doing you the same harm. The earth has borne this monster long enough, and it is now high time she should be treated as she deserves." So saying, Abdallah put 2 cakes into King Beder's hands, bidding him keep them to be used as he should direct. "You told me," continued he, "the sorceress made a cake last night. It was for you to eat, but do not touch it. Nevertheless, do not refuse to receive it when she offers it you, but instead of tasting it, break off part of one of the 2 I shall give you unobserved, and eat that. As soon as she thinks you have swallowed it, she will not fail to attempt transforming you into some animal, but she shall not succeed. When she sees that she has failed, she will immediately turn her proceeding into pleasantry, as if what she had done was only out of joke to frighten you; but she will conceal a mortal grief in her heart, and think she has omitted something in the composition of her cake. As for the other cake, you shall make a present of it to her, and press her to eat it, which she will not refuse to do, were it only to convince you she does not mistrust you, though she has given you so much reason to mistrust her. When she has eaten of it, take a little water in the hollow of your hand, and throwing it in her face, say, 'Quit that form now you wear, and take that of such or such animal, as you shall think fit. Which done, come to me with the animal, and I will tell you what you shall do afterwards.'" King Beder expressed to Abdallah in the warmest terms his great obligations to him, for his endeavours to defend him from the power of a pestilent sorceress, and after some further conversation, took his leave of him, and returned to the palace. Upon his arrival, he understood that the queen waited for him with great impatience in the garden. He went to her, and she no sooner perceived him than she came in great haste to meet him. "My dear Beder," exclaimed she, "it is said, with a great deal of reason, that nothing more forcibly shows the excess of love than absence from the object loved. I have had no quiet since I saw you, and it seems ages since I have been separated from you. If you had stayed ever so little longer, I was preparing to come and fetch you once more to my arms." "Madam," replied King Beder, "I can assure your majesty I was no less impatient to rejoin you, but I could not refuse to stay with an uncle who loves me, and had not seen me for so long a time. He would have kept me still longer, but I tore myself away from him, to come where love calls me. Of all the collations he prepared for me, I have only brought away this cake, which I desire your majesty to accept." King Beder, having wrapped up one of the 2 cakes in a handkerchief, took it out and presented it to the queen, saying, "I beg your majesty to accept of it." "I do accept it with all my heart," replied the queen, receiving it, "and will eat it with pleasure for yours and your good uncle's sake. But before I taste of it, I desire you will, for my sake, eat a piece of this, which I have made for you during your absence." "Fair queen," answered King Beder, receiving it with great respect, "such hands as your majesty's can never make anything but what is excellent, and I cannot sufficiently acknowledge the favour you do me." King Beder then artfully substituted in the place of the queen's cake the other which old Abdallah had given him, and having broken off a piece, he put it in his mouth, and cried while he was eating, "Ah, queen, I never tasted anything so excellent in my life." They being near a cascade, the sorceress, seeing him swallow one bit of the cake, and ready to eat another, took a little water in the palm of her hand, and throwing it in the king's face, said, "Wretch, quit that form of a man, and take that of a vile horse, blind and lame." These words not having the desired effect, the sorceress was strangely surprised to find King Beder still in the same form, and that he only started for fear. Her cheeks reddened, and as she saw that she had missed her aim, "Dear Beder," cried she, "this is nothing, recover yourself. I did not intend you any harm. I only did it to see what you would say. I should be the most miserable and most execrable of women, should I attempt so black a deed, not only on account of all the oaths I have sworn, but also of the many testimonies of love I have given you." "Puissant queen," replied King Beder, "persuaded as I am that what your majesty did was only to divert yourself, I could not help being surprised. What could hinder me from being a little moved at the pronouncing of so strange a transformation? But, madam," continued he, "let us drop this discourse; and since I have eaten of your cake, would you do me the favour to taste mine?" Queen Labe, who could not better justify herself than by showing this mark of confidence in the king of Persia, broke off a piece of his cake and ate it. She had no sooner swallowed it than she appeared much troubled, and remained, as it were, motionless. King Beder lost no time, but took water out of the same basin, and throwing it in her face, cried, "Abominable sorceress, quit the form of woman, and be turned instantly into a mare." The same moment Queen Labe was transformed into a very beautiful mare, and her confusion was so great to find herself in that condition, that she shed tears in great abundance. She bowed her head to the feet of King Beder, thinking to move him to compassion; but though he could have been so moved, it was absolutely out of his power to repair the mischief he had done. He led her into the stable belonging to the palace, and put her into the hands of a groom, to bridle and saddle. But of all the bridles which the groom tried upon her, not one would fit. This made him cause 2 horses to be saddled, one for the groom and the other for himself, and the groom led the mare after him to old Abdallah's. Abdallah, seeing at a distance King Beder coming with the mare, doubted not but he had done what he had advised him. "Cursed sorceress," said he immediately to himself in a transport of joy, "heaven has at length punished thee as thou deservest." King Beder alighted at Abdallah's door, and entered with him into the shop, embracing and thanking him for all the signal services he had done him. He related to him the whole matter, with all its circumstances, and moreover told him he could find no bridle fit for the mare. Abdallah bridled the mare himself, and as soon as King Beder had sent back the groom with the 2 horses, he said to him, "My lord, you have no reason to stay any longer in this city. Mount the mare and return to your kingdom. I have but one thing more to recommend to you, and that is, if you should ever happen to part with the mare, be sure not to give up the bridle." King Beder promised to remember this, and having taken leave of the good old man, he departed. Section 5 of the Arabian Nights Entertainments, Volume 3, translated by Jonathan Scott. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Gillian Henry. The Arabian Nights Entertainments, Volume 3, translated by Jonathan Scott, 1754 to 1829. Section 5. The Story of Beder, Prince of Persia, and Jehaunara, Princess of Samandal or Samandar. Part 5. The young King of Persia had no sooner got out of the city than he began to reflect with joy on his deliverance, and that he had the sorceress in his power, who had given him so much cause to tremble. 3 days after, he arrived at a great city, where, entering the suburbs, he met a venerable old man, walking towards a pleasure house. "Sir," said the old man, stopping him, "may I presume to ask from what part of the world you come?" The king halted to satisfy him, and as they were conversing together, an old woman came up, who, stopping likewise, wept and sighed heavily at the sight of the mare. King Beder and the old man left off discoursing to look at the old woman, whom the king asked what cause she had to be so much afflicted. "Alas, sir," replied she, "it is because your mare resembles so perfectly one my son had, and which I still mourn the loss of on his account, and should think yours were the same, did I not know she was dead. Sell her to me, I beseech you. I will give you more than she is worth, and thank you too." "Good woman," replied King Beder, "I am heartily sorry I cannot comply with your request. My mare is not to be sold." "Alas, sir," continued the old woman, "do not refuse me this favour for the love of God. My son and I shall certainly die with grief if you do not grant it." "Good mother," replied the king, "I would grant it with all my heart, if I were disposed to part with so good a beast; but if I were so disposed, I believe you would hardly give 1,000 pieces of gold for her, and I could not sell her for less." "Why should I not give so much?" replied the old woman. "If that be the lowest price, you need only say you will take it, and I will fetch you the money." King Beder, seeing the old woman so poorly dressed, could not imagine she could find such a sum, and said, to try her, "Go, fetch me the money, and the mare is yours." The old woman immediately unloosed a purse she carried fastened to her girdle, and desiring him to alight, bade him tell over the money, and in case he found it came short of the sum demanded, she said her house was not far off, and she could quickly fetch the rest. The surprise of King Beder at the sight of the purse was not small. "Good woman," said he, "do you not perceive I have bantered you all this while? I assure you my mare is not to be sold." The old man, who had been witness to all that had passed, now began to speak. "Son," said he to King Beder, "it is necessary you should know one thing, which I find you are ignorant of, and that is, that in this city it is not permitted to any one to tell a lie, on any account whatsoever, on pain of death. You cannot refuse taking this good woman's money and delivering your mare, when she gives you the sum according to the agreement, and this you had better do without any noise, than expose yourself to what may ensue." King Beder, mortified to find himself thus trapped by his rash proffer, alighted with great regret. The old woman stood ready to seize the reins, immediately unbridled the mare, and taking some water in her hand, from a stream that ran in the middle of the street, threw it in the mare's face, uttering these words: "Daughter, quit that strange shape, and reassume thy own." The transformation was effected in a moment, and King Beder, who swooned as soon as he saw Queen Labe appear, would have fallen to the ground, if the old man had not hindered him. The old woman, who was the mother of Queen Labe, and had instructed her in all her magic secrets, had no sooner embraced her daughter, than, to show her fury, she in an instant, by whistling, caused to rise a genie of a gigantic form and stature. This genie immediately took King Beder on one shoulder, and the old woman with the magic queen on the other, and transported them in a few minutes to the palace of Queen Labe in the City of Enchantments. The magic queen immediately fell upon King Beder, reproaching him violently. "Is it thus," said she, "ungrateful wretch, that thy unworthy uncle and thou repay me for all the kindnesses I have done you? I shall soon make you both feel what you deserve." She said no more, but taking water in her hand, threw it in his face with these words: "Quit the form of man, and take that of an owl." These words were soon followed by the effect, and immediately she commanded one of her women to shut up the owl in a cage, and give him neither meat nor drink. The woman took the cage, but without regarding what the queen had ordered, gave him both meat and drink, and being old Abdallah's friend, sent him word privately how the queen had treated his nephew, and apprised him of her design to destroy both him and King Beder, that he might take measures to prevent her intentions and secure himself. Abdallah knew no common means would do with Queen Labe. He therefore whistled in a peculiar manner, and there immediately arose a giant with 4 wings, who, presenting himself before him, asked what he would have. "Lightning," said Abdallah to him, for so was the genie called, "I command you to preserve the life of King Beder, son of Queen Gulnare. Go to the palace of the magic queen, and transport immediately to the capital of Persia the compassionate woman who has the cage in custody, to the end she may inform Queen Gulnare of the danger the king her son is in, and the occasion he has for her assistance. Take care not to frighten her when you come before her, and acquaint her from me what she ought to do." Lightning immediately disappeared, and in an instant reached the palace of the magic queen. He instructed the woman, lifted her up into the air, and transported her to the capital of Persia, where he placed her on the terrace of Gulnare's palace. She descended into her apartment, and there found Queen Gulnare and Queen Farasche her mother lamenting their mutual misfortunes. She made them a profound reverence, and by the relation she gave them, they soon understood the great need King Beder had of their assistance. Queen Gulnare was so overjoyed at the news, that rising from her seat, she went and embraced the good woman, telling her how much she was obliged to her for the service she had done her. Then going immediately out, she commanded the trumpets to sound, and the drums to beat, to acquaint the city that the king of Persia would suddenly return safe to his kingdom. She then went and found King Saleh her brother, whom Farasche had caused to come speedily thither by a certain fumigation. "Brother," said she to him, "the king your nephew, my dear son, is in the City of Enchantments, under the power of Queen Labe. Both you and I must go to deliver him, for there is no time to be lost." King Saleh forthwith assembled a puissant body of his marine troops, who soon rose out of the sea. He also called to his assistance the genii, his allies, who appeared with a much more numerous army than his own. As soon as the 2 armies were joined, he put himself at the head of them, with Queen Farasche, Queen Gulnare, and the princesses, who would all have their share in this enterprise. They then ascended into the air, and soon poured down on the palace and city of enchantments, where the magic queen, her mother, and all the adorers of fire were destroyed in an instant. Queen Gulnare had ordered the woman who brought the account of Queen Labe's transforming and imprisoning her son to follow her close, and bade her in the confusion go and seize the cage and bring it to her. This order was executed as she wished, and Queen Gulnare was no sooner in possession of the cage than she opened it and took out the owl, saying, as she sprinkled a little water upon him, "My dear son, quit that strange form and resume thy natural one of a man." In a moment Queen Gulnare, instead of the hideous owl, beheld King Beder her son. She immediately embraced him with an excess of joy, her tears supplying more forcibly the place of words. She could not let him go, and Queen Farasche was obliged to force him from her in her turn. After her he was likewise embraced by the king his uncle and his relations. Queen Gulnare's first care was to look out for old Abdallah, to whom she had been obliged for the recovery of the king of Persia, and who, being brought to her, she said to him, "My obligations to you have been so great, that there is nothing within my power but I would freely do for you, as a token of my acknowledgment. Do but inform me in what I can serve you." "Great queen," replied Abdallah, "if the lady whom I sent to your majesty will but consent to the marriage I offer her, and the king of Persia will give me leave to reside at his court, I will spend the remainder of my days in his service." The queen then turned to the lady, who was present, and finding by her modest shame that she was not averse to the match proposed, she caused them to join hands, and the king of Persia and she took care of their fortune. This marriage occasioned the king of Persia to speak thus to the queen: "Madam," said he, "I am heartily glad of this match which your majesty has just made. There remains one more, which I desire you to think of." Queen Gulnare did not at first comprehend what marriage he meant, but after a little considering, she said, "Of yours you mean, son. I consent to it with all my heart." Then turning and looking at her brother's sea attendants and the genie who were still present, "Go," said she, "and traverse both sea and land, to seek the most lovely and amiable princess worthy of the king my son, and when you have found her, come and tell us." "Madam," replied King Beder, "it is to no purpose for them to take all that trouble. You have no doubt heard that I have already given my heart to the princess of Samandal, upon the bare relation of her beauty. I have seen her, and do not repent of the present I then made her. In a word, neither earth nor sea, in my opinion, can furnish a princess like her. It is true, upon my declaring my love, she treated me in a way that would have extinguished any flame less strong than mine. But I hold her excused. She could not treat me with less rigour after your imprisoning the king her father, of which I was the innocent cause. But the king of Samandal may, perhaps, have changed his resolution, and his daughter the princess may consent to love me, when she sees her father has agreed to it." "Son," replied Queen Gulnare, "if only the Princess Jehaun can make you happy, it is not my design to oppose you. The king your uncle need only have the king of Samandal brought, and we shall see whether he be still of the same untractable temper." Strictly as the king of Samandal had been kept during his captivity by King Saleh's orders, yet he always had great respect shown him. King Saleh caused a chafing dish of coals to be brought, into which he threw a certain composition, uttering at the same time some mysterious words. As soon as the smoke began to arise, the palace shook, and immediately the king of Samandal, with King Saleh's officers, appeared. The king of Persia cast himself at the king of Samandal's feet, and kneeling said, "It is no longer King Saleh that demands of your majesty the honour of your alliance for the king of Persia. It is the king of Persia himself that humbly begs that boon, and I persuade myself your majesty will not persist in being the cause of the death of a king, who can no longer live if he does not share life with the amiable Princess Jehaunara." The king of Samandal did not long suffer the king of Persia to remain at his feet. He embraced him, and obliging him to rise, said, "I shall be sorry to have contributed in the least to the death of a monarch who is so worthy to live. If it be true that so precious a life cannot be preserved without the possession of my daughter, live, sir, she is yours. She has always been obedient to my will, and I cannot think she will now oppose it." Speaking these words, he ordered one of his officers, whom King Saleh had permitted to attend him, to go for the princess, and bring her to him immediately. The princess continued where the king of Persia had left her. The officer perceived her, and brought her soon with her women. The king of Samandal embraced her, and said, "Daughter, I have provided a husband for you. It is the king of Persia, the most accomplished monarch at present in the universe. The preference he has given you over all other princesses obliges us both to express our gratitude." "Sir," replied the Princess Jehaunara, "your majesty well knows I never have presumed to disobey your will. I shall always be ready to obey you, and I hope the king of Persia will forget my ill treatment of him, and consider it was duty, not inclination, that forced me to it." The nuptials were celebrated in the palace of the City of Enchantments, with the greatest solemnity, as all the lovers of the magic queen, who had resumed their pristine forms as soon as she ceased to live, assisted at them, and came to return their thanks to the king of Persia, Queen Gulnare, and King Saleh. They were all sons of kings, princes, or persons of high rank. King Saleh conducted the king of Samandal to his dominions, and put him again in possession of his throne. The king of Persia, at the height of his wishes, returned to his capital with Queen Gulnare, Queen Farashe, and the princesses. The Queen Farashe and the princesses continued there till King Saleh came to reconduct them to his kingdom under the waves of the sea. End of section 5. End of The Story of Beder, Prince of Persia, and Jehaunara, Princess of Samandal, or Samandar. Section 6 of the Arabian Nights Entertainments, Volume 3, translated by Jonathan Scott. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Gillian Hendry. The Arabian Nights Entertainments, Volume 3, translated by Jonathan Scott, 1754 to 1829. Section 6. The History of Prince Zayn al-Asnam and the Sultan of the Genii. Part 1. A sultan of Bussorah, who possessed great wealth, and was well beloved by his subjects, had no children, which occasioned him great affliction, and therefore he made presents to all the holy persons in his dominions, to engage them to beg a son for him of heaven, and their prayers being effectual, the queen proved with child, and was happily delivered of a prince, who was named Zayn al-Asnam, which signifies ornament of the statues. The sultan caused all the astrologers in his kingdom to be assembled, and ordered them to calculate the infant's nativity. They found by their observations that he would live long and be very brave, but that all his courage would be little enough to carry him through the misfortunes that threatened him. The sultan was not daunted at this prediction. "My son," said he, "is not to be pitied, since he will be brave. It is fit that princes should have a taste of misfortunes, for adversity tries virtue, and they are the better qualified to reign." He rewarded the astrologers and dismissed them, and caused Zayn to be educated with the greatest care, appointing him able masters as soon as he was of age to receive their instructions. In short, he proposed to make him an accomplished prince, when on a sudden
this good sultan fell sick of a disorder, which all the skill of his physicians could not cure. Perceiving his disease was mortal, he sent for his son, and among other things advised him rather to endeavour to be loved than to be feared by his people, not to give ear to flatterers, to be as slow in rewarding as in punishing, because it often happens that monarchs misled by false appearances load wicked men with favours, and oppress the innocent. As soon as the sultan was dead, Prince Zeyn went into mourning, which he wore 7 days, and on the 8th he ascended the throne, taking his father's seal off the royal treasury, and putting on his own, beginning thus to taste the sweets of ruling, the pleasure of seeing all his courtiers bow down before him, and make it their whole study to show their zeal and obedience. In a word, the sovereign power was too agreeable to him. He only regarded what his subjects owed to him, without considering what was his duty towards them, and consequently took little care to govern them well. He revelled in all sorts of debauchery among the voluptuous youth, on whom he conferred the prime employments in the kingdom. He lost all command of his power. Being naturally prodigal, he set no bounds to his grants, so that his women and his favourites insensibly drained his treasury. The queen his mother was still living, a discreet, wise princess. She had several times unsuccessfully tried to check her son's prodigality and debauchery, giving him to understand that if he did not soon take another course, he would not only squander his wealth, but also alienate the minds of his people, and occasion some revolution, which perhaps might cost him his crown and his life. What she had predicted had nearly happened. The people began to murmur against the government, and their murmurs had certainly been followed by a general revolt, had not the queen had the address to prevent it. That princess, being acquainted with the ill posture of affairs, informed the sultan, who at last suffered himself to be prevailed upon. He committed the government to discreet aged men, who knew how to keep the people within the bounds of duty. Zeyn, seeing all his wealth consumed, repented that he had made no better use of it. He fell into a profound melancholy, and nothing could comfort him. One night he saw in a dream a venerable old man coming towards him, who with a smiling countenance said, "Know, Zeyn, that there is no sorrow but what is followed by mirth, no misfortune but what in the end brings some happiness. If you desire to see the end of your affliction, set out for Egypt, go to Grand Cairo, where great prosperity awaits you." The young sultan was struck with his dream, and spoke of it very seriously to his mother, who only laughed at it. "My son," said she to him, "would you go into Egypt on the faith of an illusive dream?" "Why not, madam?" answered Zeyn. "Do you imagine all dreams are chimerical? No, no, some of them are mysterious. My preceptors have told me 1,000 incidents, which will not permit me to doubt of it. Besides, though I were not otherwise convinced, I could not forbear giving some credit to my dreams. The old man who appeared to me had something supernatural. He was not one of those men whom nothing but age makes venerable. There appeared a divine air about his person. In short, he was such a one as our great prophet is represented; and if you will have me tell you what I think, I believe it was he who, pitying my affliction, designs to relieve it. I rely on the confidence he has inspired me with. I am full of his promises, and have resolved to follow his advice." The queen endeavoured to persuade him, but in vain. The sultan committed to her the government of the kingdom, set out one night very privately from his palace, and took the road to Cairo, without suffering any person to attend him. After much trouble and fatigue, he arrived at that famous city, like which there are few in the world, either for extent or beauty. He alighted at the gate of a mosque, where, being spent with weariness, he lay down. No sooner was he fallen asleep than he saw the same old man, who said to him, "I am pleased with you, my son. You have given credit to my words. You are come hither, without being deterred by the length or the difficulties of the way. But know, I have not put you upon undertaking such a long journey with any other design than to try you. I find you have courage and resolution. You deserve I should make you the richest and happiest prince in the world. Return to Bussorah, and you shall find immense wealth in your palace. No king ever possessed so rich a treasure." The sultan was not pleased with this dream. "Alas!" thought he to himself when he awoke, "how much was I mistaken! That old man, whom I took for our prophet, is no other than the production of my disturbed imagination. My fancy was so full of him, that it is no wonder I have seen him again. I had best return to Bussorah. What should I do here any longer? It is fortunate that I told none but my mother the motive of my journey. I should become a jest to my people, if they knew it." Accordingly he set out again for his kingdom, and as soon as he arrived there, the queen asked him whether he returned well pleased. He told her all that had happened, and was so much concerned for having been so credulous, that the queen, instead of adding to his vexation by reproving or laughing at him, comforted him. "Forbear afflicting yourself, my son," said she. "If God has appointed you riches, you will have them without any trouble. Be contented. All that I recommend to you is, to be virtuous. Renounce the delights of dancing, music, and wine. Shun all these pleasures. They have already almost ruined you. Apply yourself to make your subjects happy. By securing their happiness, you will establish your own." Sultan Zeyn vowed that he would for the future follow his mother's advice, and be directed by the wise viziers she had chosen to assist him in supporting the weight of government. But the very night after he returned to his palace, he saw the old man the third time in a dream, who said to him, "The time of your prosperity is come, brave Zeyn. Tomorrow morning, as soon as you are up, take a little pickaxe and dig in the late sultan's closet. You will there find a rich treasure." As soon as the sultan awoke, he got up, ran to the queen's apartment, and with much eagerness told her the new dream of that night. "Really, my son," said the queen smiling, "this is a very positive old man. He is not satisfied with having deceived you twice. Have you a mind to believe him again?" "No, madam," answered Zeyn, "I give no credit to what he has said, but I will, for my own satisfaction, search my father's closet." "I really fancied so," cried the queen, laughing heartily. "Go, my son, satisfy yourself. My comfort is, that work is not so fatiguing as the journey to Egypt." "Well, madam," answered the sultan, "I must own that this third dream has restored my confidence, for it is connected with the two others. Let us examine the old man's words. He first directed me to go into Egypt. There he told me he had put me upon taking that journey only to try me. 'Return to Bussorah,' said he, 'that is the place where you are to find treasures.' This night he has exactly pointed out to me the place where they are. These three dreams, in my opinion, are connected. After all, they may be chimerical, but I would rather search in vain than blame myself as long as I live, for having perhaps missed great riches by being unseasonably incredulous." Having spoken thus, he left the queen's apartment, caused a pickaxe to be brought him, and went alone into the late sultan's closet. He immediately began to break up the ground, and took up above half the square stones it was paved with, but yet saw not the least appearance of what he sought. He ceased working to take a little rest, thinking within himself, "I am much afraid my mother had cause enough to laugh at me." However, he took heart and went on with his labour. Nor had he cause to repent, for on a sudden he discovered a white slab, which he took up, and under it found a door, made fast with a steel padlock, which he broke with the pickaxe, and opened the door, which covered a staircase of white marble. He immediately lighted a lamp, and went down the stairs into a room, the floor whereof was laid with tiles of china ware, and the roof and walls were of crystal. But he particularly fixed his eyes on 4 shelves, a little raised above the rest of the floor, on each of which were 10 urns of porphyry. He fancied they were full of wine. "Well," said he, "that wine must be very old, I do not question but it is excellent." He went up to one of the urns, took off the cover, and with no less joy than surprise perceived it was full of pieces of gold. He searched all the 40, one after another, and found them full of the same coin, took out a handful, and carried it to the queen. The princess, it may be imagined, was amazed when the sultan gave her an account of what he had discovered. "Oh, my son," said she, "take heed you do not lavish away all this wealth foolishly, as you have already done the royal treasure. Let not your enemies have so much occasion to rejoice." "No, madam," answered Zeyn, "I will from henceforward live in such a manner as shall be pleasing to you." The queen desired her son to conduct her to the wonderful subterraneous place, which the late sultan her husband had made with such secrecy that she had never heard of it. Zeyn led her to the closet, down the marble stairs, and into the chamber where the urns were. She observed everything with the eye of curiosity, and in a corner spied a little urn of the same sort of stone as the others. The prince had not before taken notice of it, but opening, found in it a golden key. "My son," said the queen, "this key certainly belongs to some other treasure. Let us search well, perhaps we may discover the use it is designed for." They examined the chamber with the utmost exactness, and at length found a keyhole in one of the panels of the wall. The sultan immediately tried, and as readily opened the door, which led into a chamber, in the midst of which were 9 pedestals of massive gold, on 8 of which stood as many statues, each of them made of a single diamond, and from them darted such a brightness that the whole room was perfectly light. "Oh heavens!" cried Zeyn in astonishment, "where could my father find such rarities?" The 9th pedestal redoubled this amazement, for it was covered with a piece of white satin, on which were written these words: "Dear son, it cost me much toil to procure these 8 statues, but though they are extraordinarily beautiful, you must understand that there is a 9th in the world, which surpasses them all. That alone is worth more than 1,000 such as these. If you desire to be master of it, go to the city of Cairo in Egypt. One of my old slaves, whose name is Mobarec, lives there. You will easily find him. The first person you meet will show you his house. Visit him, and tell him all that has befallen you. He will know you to be my son, and conduct you to the place where that wonderful statue is, which you will obtain with safety." The young sultan, having read these words, said to the queen, "I should be sorry to be without that 9th statue. It must certainly be a very rare piece, since all these together are not of so much value. I will set out for Grand Cairo. Nor do I believe, madam, that you will now oppose my design." "No, my son," answered the queen, "I am not against it. You are certainly under the special protection of our great prophet. He will not suffer you to perish in this journey. Set out when you think fit. Your viziers and I will take care of the government during your absence." The prince made ready his equipage, but would take only a small number of slaves with him. Nothing remarkable befell him by the way, but arriving at Cairo, he inquired for Mobarec. The people told him he was one of the wealthiest inhabitants of the city, that he lived like a great lord, and that his house was open, especially for strangers. Zeyn was conducted thither, knocked at the gate, which a slave opened, and demanded, "What is it you want, and who are you?" "I am a stranger," answered the prince, "and having heard much of the Lord Mobarec's generosity, am come to take up my lodging with him." The slave desired Zeyn to wait while he went to acquaint his master, who ordered him to request the stranger to walk in. The slave returned to the gate, and told the prince he was welcome. Zeyn went in, crossed a large court, and entered a hall magnificently furnished, where Mobarec expected him, and received him very courteously, returning thanks for the honour he did him in accepting a lodging in his house. The prince, having answered his compliment, said to Mobarec, "I am the son of the late sultan of Bussorah, and my name is Zeyn Alasnam." "That sovereign," said Mobarec, "was formerly my master; but, my lord, I never knew of any children he had. What is your age?" "I am 20 years old," answered the sultan. "How long is it since you left my father's court?" "Almost 22 years," replied Mobarec. But how can you convince me that you are his son?" "My father," rejoined Zeyn, "had a subterraneous place under his closet, in which I have found 40 porphyry urns full of gold." "And what more is there?" said Mobarec. "There are," answered the prince, 9 pedestals of massive gold, on 8 whereof are as many diamond statues, and on the 9th a piece of white satin, on which my father has written what I am to do to procure another statue, more valuable than all those together. You know where that statue is, for it is mentioned on the satin that you will conduct me to it." As soon as he had spoken these words, Mobarec fell down at his feet, and kissing one of his hands several times, said, "I bless God for having brought you hither. I know you to be the sultan of Bussorah's son. If you will go to the place where the wonderful statue is, I will conduct you; but you must first rest here a few days. This day I treat the great men of the court. We were at table when word was brought me of your being at the door. Will you vouchsafe to come and be merry with us?" "I shall be very glad," replied Zeyn, "to be admitted to your feast." Mobarec immediately led him under a dome where the company was, seated him at the table, and served him on the knee. The nobles of Cairo were surprised, and whispered to one another, "Who is this stranger, to whom Mobarec pays so much respect?" When they had dined, Mobarec, directing his discourse to the company, said, "Nobles of Cairo, do not think much to see me serve this young stranger in this manner. Know that he is the son of the sultan of Bussorah, my master. His father purchased me, and died without making me free, so that I am still a slave, and consequently all I have of right belongs to this young prince, his sole heir." Here Zeyn interrupted him. "Mobarec," said he, "I declare before all these lords that I make you free from this moment, and that I renounce all right to your person, and all you possess. Consider what you would have me do more for you." Mobarec kissed the ground, and returned the prince most hearty thanks. Wine was then brought in, they drank all day, and towards evening presents were distributed among the guests, who departed. The next day Zeyn said to Mobarec, "I have taken rest enough. I came not to Cairo to take my pleasure. My design is to obtain the 9th statue. It is time for us to set out in search of it." "Sir," said Mobarec, "I am ready to comply with your desires, but you know not what dangers you must encounter to make this precious acquisition." "Whatever the danger may be," answered the prince, "I have resolved to make the attempt. I will either perish or succeed. All that happens in this world is by God's direction. Do you but bear me company, and let your resolution be equal to mine." Mobarec, finding him determined to set out, called his servants, and ordered them to make ready his equipage. The prince and he then performed the ablution, and the prayer enjoined, which is called Farz, and that done, they set out. On their way they took notice of abundance of strange and wonderful things, and travelled many days. At length, being come to a delightful spot, they alighted from their horses. Mobarec then said to all the servants that attended them, "Do you remain in this place, and take care of our equipage till we return." Then he said to Zeyn, "Now, sir, let us advance by ourselves. We are near the dreadful place where the 9th statue is kept. You will stand in need of all your courage." End of part 1. End of section 6.